Welcome to Thursday morning at BriForum. I hope everybody's feeling pin sharp after last night. Nobody had one too many. I get the feeling these will be perhaps the lowest total attendance across the whole of BriForum this Thursday morning. So congratulations, everybody got up, everybody made it here, everybody looks good. So I think we'll start. We've got a couple of housekeeping things at the very start of my presentations, so we'll just go through those. There's been a number of Windows 8 and Server 2012 presentations over the course of these 3 days. Between the speakers, we've tried as much as possible not to overlap too much with each other, but obviously there is going to be some, so if we do overlap, then please forgive us. So my name is Jim Moyle. I'm from the UK, from London, as you can probably tell from the accent. I'm the lead solutions consultant for Atlantis Computing, and you can find me on Twitter at Jim Moyle, and I have a fairly neglected blog at www.jimmoyle.com. Brian will have all the slides, so in about a week's time, the videos should be up. Brian always says this at every single BriForum, it'll be up in a week. He's never managed it yet, but he's getting closer. So, first bit of housekeeping that I've got to go through is last night. These two here persuaded me to go out for drinks, and I said, as long as they get me back by 10:30, or you're giving my presentation tomorrow morning. This is them looking smug after they got me back at 10:29 and 45 seconds in the cab. So the most interesting cab rides I've ever had. Second bit of housekeeping is I'm going to ask a few questions throughout this session, but who's got an Android phone? All right. Who's used the BriForum events app on the Android phone? Who thinks it's rubbish? Yeah? Every single one of us. Okay? So Justin, who's the guy from Tech Target, who's in charge of beating up on Tap Terror, I promised him I'd do that, and I would see if it's everybody's that sucked or just people who came up to talk to him, and it looks like it is actually everybody. Android being way outselling iOS, or you Apple boys out there. So they should design for Android first nowadays, right? So, Windows 8. October 26th release date. Not far away. What was it last night in the Geek Out? April 9th, 2014 for Windows XP to go away. I think that's what, 623 days? Maybe Microsoft can get Windows 9 out before they get rid of Windows XP. So it's fairly quick after Windows 7 is Windows 8, and all they've done is mess up our interface. But all the consumer devices are going to start shipping with Windows 8, aren't they? At least. And funnily enough, we're going to start buying Windows 8, but they will have a downgrade to Windows 7, which everybody will be using, I presume. So, who has finished or who's doing a Windows 7 rollout? Hands up. All right, pretty much everybody. Have any of you upgraded from Vista? Hey, Tim. Is that on your home PC? All right, so everybody pretty much is on Windows 7. and everybody skipped Vista, apart from Tim. So let's say that we don't even need to ask the last question. Everybody's just upgraded from XP. Who is planning Windows 8 rollout? 2, 2.5, 3, 3.5, okay. So I'm guessing that you're going to pretty much skip Windows 8, right, and go to Windows 9 or 10, whatever. Last question. Who's planning to hold on to Windows 7 till they pry it from your cold, dead hands? All right, one, quite a few. And I think that's what's going to happen, because if you look at the evidence, you know, there's still enterprise out there that are still on Windows XP. Doing a desktop rollout, whether it's physical or virtual, is painful. And you want to do it as few times as possible. Everybody's gone to Windows 7 because it's reasonably good OS. And support for Windows 7 ends in 2020. So, and that's what's official now. So, if support ends in 2020, and let's face it, that's going to get pushed out, we can get away with not moving for the next 8 years. We can get away with not doing another desktop rollout for 8 years. I'm kind of liking that, actually. It's not good for, you know, business or whatever, but if I was running an enterprise, I'd think, yeah, let's do that. Let's stick. If by 2020 things haven't moved on in the desktop space, I'd be very surprised. Things are moving really quickly when you're talking about getting apps and data to users. Everybody's been talking about consumerization, about mobility, about cloud. And all these things are going to keep innovating. So it's quite possible that, say, Windows 7 gets pushed out another 4 years support. And in 10 years' time, is our world going to look the same? Are we going to be sitting or standing here in BriForum thinking about a Windows client OS? Maybe not. Maybe Google will have a desktop in the cloud. Maybe some startup maybe some kid in school who's going to think of it right now. It's a long way down the line. I have a feeling that for a lot of us, that Windows 7 is actually going to be the last time we roll out a mainstream Windows client OS. Because by the time we have to do it again, the world's going to have changed, and we're going to have a lot more options. So, interesting things to think about. It kind of makes Windows 8 Vista, doesn't it? By the way, that's Niraj over there from Microsoft. He's going to come and beat me up if I get things wrong. Stand up, Niraj, so everybody can tell you where you are. Go on. All right. So Windows 8. So a couple of questions along the same lines on hypervisors. And if you've got multiple environments, it's fine. Just what's your main? Who's using Hyper-V right now as their main hypervisor? 1, 2, 3, 2. Who's using XenServer as their main hypervisor? Okay, more? Twice as much. Who's using VMware? As expected, lots more. Who plans to use Hyper-V 2012 as their main hypervisor? Okay, not as many as I would expect. Who's going to use Hyper-V 2012 to beat up VMware on price? Yeah. I think a lot of people are planning to do that. I really like 2012. I think 2012 as a server OS is going to be a big success. I think it's going to be the success that Windows 8 won't be. So talk about Windows 8. So the biggest change to Windows 8 is the upgrades to RDP. Some really nice stuff has gone on. One of the things that you'll see going forward is that RDP 8 has gone away, And everything now is called Remote FX. So if you remember when Citrix changed ICA to HDX, Microsoft have changed RDP to Remote FX. So it's now, instead of being the stuff that they bought from Callista, it's now an overarching marketing term for user experience using a remoting protocol from Microsoft. As usual, same as with RDP, this is going to be licensable. So people can take Remote FX and do with it what they will, which is a good job, because Microsoft don't provide all the functionality that we'd like. For instance, non-Microsoft endpoints. So partners will be grabbing Remote FX or RDP8 and implementing new versions of it and taking advantage of all their virtual channels and stuff. So like Quest used to do with RDP, they used to take it and add new virtual channels to it. And even Aqua Connect, although I've not heard from them in ages, they did like the Mac terminal services stuff, and that was over RDP. So improvements, touch friendly. So you've got the Metro interface, Microsoft Surface. So it absolutely needs to transmit touch backwards and forwards, and it does that very well. Including multi-touch. Touch pointer is to help you when you've got a desktop application and your fingers are too fat to hit the buttons because they're tiny. So it's, instead of making the app touch friendly, there's a layer in between to try and help you not get annoyed with the app. Interestingly, Citrix have got their mobility kit, which helps with this, with some of the major applications, but it's only the major applications, Office and stuff. There's nothing like that from Microsoft. Aero. I always get this question, actually. Can we use Aero? I don't care. Do you really care? But people seem to. Aero, always on, fine. Adaptive graphics. So TCP or UDP, depending on what the graphics is. Change the bandwidth, change the way that everything's displayed. And as part of that, a separate way of treating text. So as we've kind of got that VMware build to lossless on the UDP parts of animation and video, text is treated differently, so text should always be sharp. Treat text and keep it sharp. Image and the build to lossless UDP stuff for videos and animations. Media streaming, there is some big changes here. Now, Windows Media Redirection was always there. It's still there. Server-side video detection now. We'll come back to that in a second. New codec, so everything is using H.264 right now, which means that new codecs helps with video, good audio, good FPS video, and better VoIP, all sort of come along with 264. I think it's a very good move, especially that bandwidth drop for video. Really marked, so down from about 30 meg to 2 or 3 meg. So if you're, even on the LAN, that's really important if you've got enough clients, thin clients using video and animation. What I don't like is that the only thing that's been redirected is Windows Media Player. Everything else is rendered on the server. Now, I really love client-side redirection for video, because although you've got to do a tiny buffer at the start, so you've got to wait a little bit, it's always as good as local execution, because it is local execution. and local execution is always superior to anything over remoting protocol. So the more stuff you can not render on the server and you can render on the client, the better. Of course, you've got to bear in mind your bandwidth and your latency and your jitter in this, but always, if you can, render on the client. Now, if you're rendering on the server, you've got a higher CPU and bandwidth cost. In Citrix world, you get that a lot because of device independence. So if you've got a Citrix receiver on your iPhone, you're not going to render flash on your client, are you? Right, so you'll render it on the server and send it down. I really like that there's a choice and there's an adaptive way of thinking. So, Niraj, more redirection, please. More video redirection to the endpoints. There you go.
We have the same situation with our partners too, right? They have to consume any kind of video. So that's equivalent to what Citrix does in terms of device independence.
That's Gaurav, guys. He's Mr. Remote FX, and he's so geeky, he was on the Geek Out last night, so I'm now doubly nervous. So as I said before, with Remote FX, only Microsoft endpoints. Partners will change that, so you'll be able to do all kinds of stuff. Although, if I'm right, Microsoft did release an RDP client for Mac, for RDP 7, so maybe. Virtual GPU. Now, there's two kinds of virtual GPU. One is when you've got a GPU actually in the server, and the other one is when you don't and you're making up out of CPU cycles. Both give you 3D capabilities and all the stuff that DirectX 11 gives you. So, in an emulated, you get software GPU. This is optimized for knowledge workloads, Office web, and browsing. Best scale for session host and VDI. What you're doing is you're increasing the CPU load on your server, on your host, right? I would say that once new video cards come out, which are designed for VDI or RDS, then perhaps that scale might change, because what you're then doing is you're offloading what you would take on your CPU back down to your GPU, and then you can scale out your CPU higher. But there's not many of those hardware cards around at the moment to enable you to do that. Most current hardware cards are designed for a single user in a desktop. And it's equivalent to running lots and lots of DirectX apps simultaneously. And when you're running the virtual GPUs, you're running many more equivalent DirectX apps on that GPU than it's been designed for. So what you're starting to get is you're starting to get custom designed GPU cards to take advantage of the vGPU stuff. I remember doing a project, and there was some Dell server, and they wanted remote FX. It had only just come out, and Dell sent me a server that somebody had hacked the bits off GPU cards to make them fit in the chassis, and then cable tied them in. So the world has moved on a little bit from then. Everybody's a bit more used to this GPUs and servers now, so you can actually buy custom-made stuff. If you do have really 3D graphics intensive stuff, hardware acceleration from the client to the server is always going to be your best bet, whether that's GPU or Teradeci or whatever you want to use. Who runs the enterprise edition of Windows? About half the people. This is a problem for the other half. Virtual GPU, very cool feature, restricted to Enterprise Edition. Dynamic memory, also very cool feature. The two best features, I think. Now, dynamic memory, you had to have an enterprise license on your Windows 7 box to enable that. I think it's going to be the case in Windows 8, although I haven't managed to confirm that. So unless you're running Enterprise Edition, you're going to miss out on the two best features. So if you're running Microsoft-based VDI, which is now possible, yeah, it doesn't have those horrible reliances on System Center. It's really easy to install. It's really easy to configure. Yes, sorry, question.
Does that also include Hyper-V Core?
So this is Enterprise Edition for Windows 8. Yeah. There's no Enterprise Edition of Server 2012. It's what's standard in Data Center now. So yeah, Enterprise Edition for servers has gone away. You can set up Microsoft VDI in minutes now if you've already got an image. And the same for RDS, it's great. I think it's probably good enough. I wouldn't have touched it before, but now I'd definitely consider it for deployments. We've got universal USB redirection. No longer requires physical vGPU, because that was part of the old Callista acquisition. I've just realized I've got Brad Peterson in the audience as well, who kind of invented ICA. I'm really in trouble now. No longer requires physical vGPU. Can be used with RDP to physical or RDS hosts. So only requires drivers on the server. Now, I'm trying to remember something to tell you guys that Brad told me about 2 years ago. To get universal USB redirection without a driver on the endpoint and the server, you need to remote the USB protocol in its entirety. You can nod or shake your head, Brad. Nod, again, good. So if you're doing it this way, this is a very large bandwidth hog, and USB was never designed to go over the wire and have latency. So we need to test. So if you're doing USB redirection, test how it affects your bandwidth. Because, and I know we've got Gaurav in the back there, so if you are remoting the USB protocol, that could be a problem for devices, because if devices can't cope with latency in USB, they may have issues. Oh yeah, USB remote, Enterprise Edition required, again. You're kind of getting a picture, right? If you want to do VDI, you need to buy Enterprise Edition. There's no two ways about it if you're running Microsoft-based VDI. So there's some VDI optimizations. There's a great new document out called Server Optimizations for Windows 2012. I've got a link to it in the latest slide. It's brand new out. I'm going to go through some of the optimizations for the VDI stack and for Windows 8. Because this isn't a particularly RDS-based session, I didn't include those, but they've also got some really good RDS-based performance optimizations in this document as well. So there's web, file server, VDI, RDS, all kinds of stuff. So really good document. Storage for VDI. Is it going to be any better with Windows 8? If we stick Windows 8 instead of Windows 7, are we going to be happy campers around storage, or are we going to be in the same old mire? Well, seeing as I work for a storage optimization company, I kind of hope that, you know, it's rubbish, because it keeps me in a job. In the document, 1 disk spindle for 4 machines. Without RAID 5, they recommend RAID 10, which is kind of what we have at the moment. So Microsoft recommendations are saying kind of what we have at the moment. Dell have just released a reference architecture with Windows 8 and VDI. You can look that up. It's a bit of a marketing exercise rather than actual reference architecture. It's a bit light on detail. They use login VSI to load up, as everybody does now, to load up their infrastructure. And they said login VSI, 10 IOPS per user with a task worker load on VSI. Well, VSI doesn't have a task worker load, right? It has light, medium, heavy, medium with flash, blah, blah. So I think they mean a light VSI workload. And actually 10 IOPS for a light VSI workload is quite high, even for Windows 7. So if Dell have done that testing at scale and they're still saying 10 IOPS, it's looking like Windows 8 is going to land us in just as much trouble as Windows 7. No improvements to storage. Seeing as we've got now an even more interactive UI, it is touch. What makes touch horrible is latency in your user experience. When you want something to move, it should follow your finger, right? It shouldn't follow behind. So Windows 8 is going to be an even more interactive workload than Windows 7. Needs to be much more fluid, needs to be, and what was the latest Google Android thing, butter-like. How Windows copes with being responsive is by bursting up demand for resources. So you can look at your machine and you do nothing and it's burbling along in the background. All of a sudden you open Outlook and your CPU spikes and your I/O demand spikes and your memory spikes, because Windows is reaching out and consuming as much workload as resources as it possibly can to get it done as fast as it can, so it's reactive to you. If Windows 8 is going to be more interactive, we're going to need to make sure we provide enough resources to it that it doesn't stutter, and your performance is going to be even more key. Also, although this REFS got announced, NTFS, you still have to have NTFS for your system drive. NTFS as a file system has lots and lots and lots of optimizations within it for spindles, for laying out of sectors and organizing the data so it works, and sequentializing data so it works on a spindle. Okay, we don't have any spindles, right? It's all abstracted. So until we actually get rid of NTFS, we're probably always going to have trouble with storage. Just because I mean, NTFS is creaking at the seams now, right? Because massive optimizations for local spindles, also designed to be a secure one-person file system. It came from the old NT days. And what we've got now is virtualization with no spindles and shared file systems, which is the opposite of what NTFS was designed for. That's why you always hear Microsoft saying, we've got this new file system thing, but changing the file system underneath Windows means you could break almost everything. So it's a desperately hard job to make a new file system and keep your legacy stuff working. So whether they manage to do it, I mean, RFS is, it's supposed to act in certain ways like NTFS on top, but underneath is completely different. Kind of like a bit like the ZFS stuff. But until we really get rid of it, I mean, cluster shared volumes, right? Trying to make a shared file system out of NTFS. Horrible thing. Wouldn't be one of my sessions without a graph. This is IOPS. This is a single Windows 8 VM running against one of the Atlantis virtual appliances. So I can measure in the back end exactly what the I/O demand is. Blue is read, red is write, and across the y-axis, the top horizontal line is 2,500 IOPS. So we're bursting on read up to about 2,500 IOPS. And we've got a small peak and then a larger peak. I can tell you that this looks exactly like Windows 7. And I've started having a look at some of the other storage processes in Windows 8. looks pretty much exactly like Windows 7. So you tend to find that your storage resources required for Windows 8 are going to be, if you use all your calculations that you did for Windows 7 and just apply everything straight to Windows 8, you're probably not going to be far wrong. So that's interesting to know. So I don't think it's got significantly worse. I don't think it's got significantly better either. So we can rely on those old calculations. That isn't true for some of your other resources, but we'll have a look at that in a second. So Hyper-V, OS overload, memory for each machine, and now much more there's a memory per machine in the system as well. So actually, there's another slide on that. I'll tell you about that later. CPU, they recommend 12 VMs per physical core. They don't state what clock speed that core is, so you can't really tie that down to like I'm going to apply 400 megahertz or 600 megahertz per user. So 12 VMs per physical core. They recommend enabling hyperthreading, and there is a prerequisite for SLAT for Server 2012, Hyper-V 2012. If you're buying a server off the shelf today, it will 99% surely have SLAT. It might catch you out if you're trying to put it on an older server though. So for new stuff, you're going to be all right. But if you're going to play around with Hyper-V on some old lab kit or whatever, you might get caught out. And in the dock, that's like, okay, we've got CPU, we've got memory, we've got storage, and then there's a whole bunch of stuff on remote effects and remote effects tuning. So you need a driver that's DirectX 11 or WDM 1.2. Okay, that's fine. And then it says consider the number, consider video, consider. Whenever I see that in a document, it looks to me like your mileage may vary. There is no recommendations here. The GPU world is changing so fast that we can't give you proper recommendations. New hardware is coming out all the time, as I said, so we can't give you proper recommendations. Perhaps it's new enough we haven't done massive scale testing, so we can't give you proper recommendations. If you're going to start using physical GPUs in your systems, you're going to have to set aside a lot of time for testing, because it hasn't really been done by a lot of people, and it's definitely not been done in 2012. And it's all changed. They've done a massive amount of work to remote effects. So what we knew before doesn't apply. If you're going to do it, test. So if you've got a emulated virtual GPU, we're getting a bit convoluted here, aren't we? Use system memory, and in system memory and on the remote effects server. So you are effectively loading up on CPU. So a lot of this stuff is kind of CPU heavy. Rendering on the server, virtual GPUs, emulated virtual GPUs. So it looks like instead, so we got the storage, that's going to stay the same. But your calculation for CPU load, you're going to need more CPU in your servers to host Windows 8. Interestingly, you'll find this again and again actually, and it's actually true for all protocols, is that resolution and number of monitors is really key on your endpoints. So if you're planning on saying to your users, yes, you can have 4 monitors, I've seen that a few times actually. People take away the PCs and give them a thin client, but they give them an extra monitor or an extra 2 monitors. And that's how they get people to upgrade, because obviously remote stuff is worse than local stuff, so you have to persuade your users in some other manner. Hopefully, if we do it right, it's not going to be worse than local stuff, but it always is. And you have to bribe users with extra monitors. Yeah. I have no idea. Gaurav. What's your question, Tim?
The last line of that slide that says the maximum resolution of this stuff. So it's not what they're actually using at the time? No, it just wants your maximum. Okay.
So the question for the mic was, is that the maximum resolution? And Gaurav's answer was no, it was, I didn't hear. Current use. So it's current use. Getting quite deep into the weeds here. Remote FX, server GPU video memory. Same as before, directly based on the amount of monitors and the resolution of those monitors. Essentially count your pixels. And the more pixels that you are shoving out to your endpoints, the more you're going to need GPU memory. Again, going back to this specialized hardware, I'm sure as the video card manufacturers ramp up to provide this sort of stuff too, and Dell and IBM sort of OEM it and all that sort of stuff, there will be sizing guidelines and there will be scalability studies and there will be all of that stuff. But at the moment, it's not really there. So yeah, as a rule of thumb, count your pixels that you're pushing out, and it will show you how much you need to, how much grunt you need in your GPUs. So you also need extra CPUs per VDI desktop. Recommendation is 2. So if you're using Windows 8, definitely 2 CPUs per VM. And pretty much has to be 64-bit. You can get away with 32-bit, but you'll get much, much better performance with 64-bit. So again, if you're using Windows 7 to get away with being 32-bit for a while, and all your app compat stuff, what you're looking at in Windows 8 is Enterprise Edition 64-bit. Otherwise, you're going to suffer on performance. I mean, you may be willing to dip into your pocket and pay the extra few quid and hardware to try and get that performance back up and still keep your 32-bit, because that's cost you less in engineering time for your apps. And then by 2020, it'll all be different anyway. Get away with it till then, maybe. So if you are thinking of moving, these are things you need to understand, especially the app compat bit, and especially the need to be 64-bit. So I covered this before, really. GPU running VDI on GPU is equivalent to running many DirectX programs on a single OS on GPUs. There will be new hardware. There are loads of new performance counters for remote FX. There will probably be teething troubles to start with. I just love it when they give out new counters and they say, "We have a new counter. Thanks very much." It goes from 0 to 5,000. All right, what's bad and what's good? Is 100 bad? Do I need to keep it below 100? Is 1,000 bad or good? I don't know. So I would like it much more if every time they had mentioned or released or talked about a perform counter, they say good, warning, critical for every single counter, because that would make our lives so much easier, right? One of the questions that I was really wanting to find out is there some intelligence around Windows 8? Does it realize it's virtualized? I mean, there was a whole thing a because Windows 7 isn't virtualization aware, and there was a big promise that Windows 8 would be virtualization aware. Now, what I'd kind of like to see in that is if you installed tools into Windows 8, you know, whether it's XenServer, Hyper-V, or ESX, that it goes, I must be virtualized. I will go and change stuff. Or even if there's a tick box on install saying, I am a virtualized OS, or a switch, or something. And then it will go off and turn off defrag and turn off all these other home use stuff or physical optimization stuff that you find in Windows 7. Doesn't really. It would have been nice. So there's still recommendations to turn off services, and these are fairly familiar ones that we turn off anyway, right? Auto updates, offline files, defrag, hibernate. And then you've got your consumer stuff as well. Home group, Windows Media Player, ICS. And when I read that, I was like, is ICS still around? I haven't used it since Windows 95, I think. There's a special bit devoted to Superfetch. That is the quote from the doc. Superfetch in Windows 8 is enabled by default. It is VDI aware. It should not be disabled. You stupid people who disable it all the time. Superfetch can further reduce memory consumption through memory page sharing, which is beneficial for VDI. You idiots. I don't know whether it's just in my head, but there's something in there that sounds like everybody who's disabling Superfetch is wrong. Well, what is Superfetch exactly? Superfetch is well, for a start, it's a technology what Microsoft was so proud of, they trademarked Superfetch. And it is a performance optimization technology. So what it does, it builds a database of your most used applications, and it goes ahead and reads those apps off the disk and puts them in memory, so that when you click on your icon for the first time, instead of reading from disk into memory and then starting your app, it just starts your app. So it's the difference between starting Outlook for the first time and starting Outlook for the second time. It's trying to give you that second time experience, but first. So what it's effectively doing is trying to learn your behavior, guess what you're going to do, and prep it. Now, in a physical world, I quite like this. I'm very happy that it can go and spend my I/O resources. In a virtual world, I'm not very happy that Windows is going off to spend my I/O resources. It's guessing what the user's going to do. If you've got a pooled VDI estate and you are refreshing desktops, you are essentially resetting that database back to either the guy that made the master image, so all of his applications, which would be, definitely not what the consumer's using, or it's going to set it back to the default application, which again is definitely not what your user is using. I still don't like Superfetch because it works the same way in Windows 7, and I don't think we were idiots to turn it off. I still think you should. If you look, the files that that tell Windows which applications to load are stored in Windows prefetch. And you can go and have a look and you can see how many apps and which apps Windows is trying to load for you using Superfetch. On my laptop, it's 57 applications. On a brand new, almost brand new install of Windows 8, there is 157 applications that it's trying to load into memory to start with. I don't like that at all. If you've got a big VDI estate and Windows 8 is trying to load all these applications from disk into memory, and that you know are the wrong applications there because you've got rid of your pooled VDI, then yeah, turn it off. Yeah.
How do you get that number 57? You looked at the .ps file?
Yes.
Wrong technology. That's pretty bad.
Is it? Am I looking at the wrong thing?
Find the information in the .db file.
Okay. I shall alter the slide before I give it to Brian, so it reads correctly. Thank you, Tim. Still don't like it. Dynamic memory. I really like dynamic memory. I think it's a really cool technology. I think it works better than both ESX and Zen servers memory optimizations. There's new for 2012. There's a new counter. You used to be able to just set min and max, but I think there's a startup, a minimum, and a maximum now. You can also change it on the fly, which you couldn't do before. Hopefully, Zen Desktop will be able to, and I haven't checked this, but the Microsoft VDI broker will be able to take advantage of this, because in the past, Zen Desktop hasn't been able to take advantage of dynamic memory properly, natively, i.e. you can't set dynamic memory from within the Citrix Zen Desktop admin console, which I wish you could. What you have to do is get a hardware profile set up with dynamic memory and then use that for your master image and then use that for Zen Desktop. So if you're doing Zen Desktop on Hyper-V, you have to, and you want dynamic memory, you've bought Enterprise Windows 7 or Windows 8, just a bit tricky to set it up. A little couple of gotchas there. Again, I think, well, this was Enterprise only in Windows 7. I haven't confirmed it is in Windows 8, but I reckon it will be. Tiered storage. So what this really means is you can split your golden image off. And so you can do what view-link clones can do and PVS can do, but MCS can't, which is separate your master image onto a different bit of storage than you're doing for your write cache. Very nice thing to be able to do. One of the biggest points for the non-adoption of MCS, and I really do quite like MCS, is that in fact you can't split off your golden image onto different storage. PVS does it really, really well because PVS holds that image in RAM, so you're reading that, all those initial reads come from RAM. There's no read from RAM, so Microsoft will say put this on really fast read storage, put it on SSD, and then you won't get a bottleneck on your golden image if you do hive it off. CSV. There is a CSV cache feature. Uses system memory and provides read acceleration. So read acceleration is easy, right? You've got IntelliCache, you've got CBRC, Hyper-V is something. Now CSV has something. Most SANs have something. Even a RAID card will have something for read. Read is easy. All you do is put your hottest blocks on the fastest bit of storage that's closest to the demand. And you can tell that because you've got historical data for reads. Writes are hard, okay? Writes are really, really hard. And that's why people will trumpet all these caches and all these acceleration technologies, but you take a little look closer and it's all read acceleration. And the reason it's all read acceleration is because write is very, very hard. And it's a logical thing that write is hard because you don't know, you can't tell the future, right? You can't tell what write is going to come in. So you can do something clever. So you can try and do some inline dedupe on the incoming writes. You could even try and do some inline compression on that other incoming writes. Or you brute force it, right? You get a whole boatload of SSD and make sure that those writes terminate on SSD and it's not some kind of cache that you can overwhelm. So the fact that we've got a nice read cache on there, that's going to help you with your boot storms. It's not going to help you with your login storms, but it's something at least I'm happy that it's there. That's the document, Performance Tuning Guidelines for Windows Server 2012. If you Google that and set your search to within the last 7 days, you'll get the right document. If you're going to think about going to 2012 or if you're going to experiment with it, go and read that doc. Excellent doc. So one of the things I like about that diagram so much, so your RDS, you got VDI, and funnily enough, you got remote PC as well, so you got direct connection to a physical PC. Now, Citrix trumpeted this on stage at Synergy recently, so that they had it too, and Microsoft just kind of slipped it in. Yeah, we've got that as well. So I like that. Terminal server, VDI, and direct to a physical PC. No system center in there, in that diagram, at all. No prerequisite for system center anymore. It's gone away. System center will help. It will provide additional features. SCCM and SCVM will help you out. You can do more stuff. But if you're just setting up a bog standard infrastructure, then you don't need system center. One of the things that they've introduced for Windows 8 for VDI is this user profile disk. VDI and RDS, I should say, user profile disk. So a user profile disk is I think it's a VHD, which sits on SMB share somewhere and stores your user settings and data, i.e. your profile, anything under users/Jim. This is really strange. So if you've got roaming profiles with folder redirection, I'm not sure what this is adding to it because you've got a very small amount of your local cache for app data, that sort of thing will be there. It's also only for one collection or pool, or if you're used to VMware, or catalog if you're Zen Desktop. So it can't roam outside the collection. It will appear as a local disk, and Microsoft recommend that you use user environment virtualization, which comes with MDOP, for roaming stuff outside of that pooled disk. I kind of like it as a technology that it's a disk that you would attach rather than copy to, yeah? Because in effect, that's kind of like profile streaming because it's on demand. Yeah, you just attach it, it thinks it's there, and it will go fetch it when you double click it. But the fact that you can't roam outside collections means that it's very, very limited use. But I guess that will change as time goes on. If you're using roaming users with full direction, and you've got user profile this, and you're using user environment virtualization, go buy something else. You've obviously got a need. Go and talk to AppSense or whoever out there and go and buy a user environment virtualization solution. the last one appears as local disk improves application compatibility. I think it's a little tenuous. The example given is Outlook. Outlook behaves better if you've got a local cache in app data. But okay. So I was actually trying to think of what the actual use cases were for this user profile disk. Instead of saying, no, it's not useful, I think it's a cool technology, and I think there should be use cases for it now. So if you don't use any kind of profile solution, so you're one of these companies that everybody comes in, they sit at their desk and they log in with their local user profile, and you decide, right, well, now 2012's out, I've got to have some kind of remote solution, and you put in RDS or a bit of VDI, yeah, great. Absolutely. Go use the user profile disk. What it does, though, or should do, is essentially providing a local cached copy of your profile. Now, if you think about it a little bit, that's kind of interesting. Because not only will it increase your login speed, but you don't have any of the problems with the on-demand streaming stuff. So that will help with non-redirected application data, because it's a moot point, but I don't think you should redirect app data. That should always come down. Does anybody redirect app data, actually? Show of hands. One. You're wrong. So it would help with non-redirected app data as well. So it will help with, well, it's locally cached, right? So yeah, it will help with everything that's meant to be local, because...
I know with roaming profiles, they trash the local app data folder.
Sorry?
With roaming profiles, they trash the local app data folder.
So I would say with roaming profiles, they trash the local app data folder. Well, it's still going to do, if it did that before, it's still going to do it again, because it's just presenting effectively, attaching a disk and saying it's a locally cached copy, right? So it doesn't affect the way that roaming profiles work. More graphs. This is a I/O graph of your first roaming profile logon. The blue line is writes and the orange line is reads, peaking up to about 600. So this is a 1 gigabyte profile that's being loaded. Now, first roaming. If you're doing VDI, pooled VDI, or if you're doing RDS, and as you should be, cleaning your profiles, first roaming logon is what you're going to have every single time, which is going to be extremely write-heavy as it copies everything down from the server. And it's going to cause you storage problems. It's going to cause you problems in your login storms. But there's no getting away from it with pooled VDI or well-executed RDS. You just have to architect around it. That is a cached roaming logon. That is massively different I/O load. Massive. So it's an order of magnitude less for write. Now, if somebody tells me I can have an order of magnitude less write on login in my VDI estate, where, how? Yes, please. So I do need to test this, by the way. This is in theory. If you can make it a cached local profile by using this user profile disk, then maybe you can drastically increase your login speed and drastically reduce your storage load as well. Maybe. Given the limitations of it that we went before, it may not. You may just ignore it and architect around your existing login storm. But as soon as that user profile disk starts to become available between collections and gets to version 2 or whatever, we'll have a look at this again, because it's got possibilities. Again, so this is Microsoft recommendations. What should I deploy? if you are using all this, as I say, go and buy a solution. Personal VMs is the direct to PC. Pooled is stateless VDI, and session is terminal server based. I kind of agree with most of those. Kind of works. But one of the things that this does show is that I really do believe that the RDS, VDI, and personal VM architecture for Windows in Server 2012 is there. It's really good. It's simple to deploy. A lot of the problems that we had with it in the past are gone. You know, you can do desktops, you can do apps, you can do VDI, you can do RDS, you can do direct to PC. Protocols, great now, especially if you're on the LAN. Although there is new WAN acceleration technologies in remote effects as well. So the $1 million question that always gets asked is, so do I need Citrix now? Well, I would say that if you're doing a simple deployment, that you just need published apps or published desktops, no, just use this, it's fine. If you're going to need all the cool stuff that Netscaler gives you, if you're going to need really, really excellent WAN performance, you're going to need stuff like branch repeaters thrown in, you're going to need some client virtualization. Yeah, absolutely, Citrix has got an answer for you for all of that kind of stuff. I think Citrix are well aware of this. I think, what was it, 57% of their revenue was XenApp and XenDesktop, and the rest of it was a combination of networking stuff, i.e. Netscaler, Cloud Gateway, Cloud Bridge, et cetera, and the online go-to stuff. So with Citrix's emphasis on cloud and mobile, and Server 2012 was being good enough for app delivery and desktop delivery, I think that we may start seeing a lot more Microsoft-based delivery of VDI and RDS. So how well Citrix cope with that, and whether their mobile and cloud strategy is paying off. And I would say it probably is, actually, because you know, if it's only 57%, which is XenApp and XenDesktop of Citrix's profits, then yeah, I would say that they've got a good chance of diversifying and innovating enough to be able to do well. Predictions, I kind of went over this right at the very start. Windows 8 will not get widespread enterprise adoption. Server 2012 will get widespread adoption. Either Microsoft or more likely the partners will add remote MX functionality to Windows 7. So the stuff that you need to go to Windows 8 now, I'm betting somebody will come up with a solution to say, we can put that into Windows 7. Nobody wants to do client OS rolls out. They're horribly painful, especially when you've got to change architectures. And I think that come 2020 or 2019, let's say, Windows 7 will still be the most common enterprise OS. And like I said, this may be the last of its type Microsoft Client OS rollout that we ever see. Any questions? That's me done. Any questions on what I've been over? I can point them at Gaurav or somebody else. Roland.
This user profile, isn't there a use case for that? If you look at the second cached logo, doesn't that include your file set?
Yes, that's what I mean. That was what I was trying to say. So asking if the user profile this would help with your cached, well, because it's a cached logon, yes, it would. That was kind of my point. So yeah, it would. Any other questions? Yes, sir. Yeah.
You didn't even mention the Metro interface. Is anybody using the Metro interface, period?
I don't mind it too much on, a mobile device. As a desktop interface, no, I don't like it.
So I mean, using server 12 with the desktop, DDI doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
No, well, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me either, but
You don't have a choice, right?
yeah.
You can't turn off Metro. There's no start button.
Well, there are utilities already that will replicate a Windows 7 experience.
Yeah, I will say, working with Windows 8, actually 8 Metro there, but working with Server 2012, which also has it, it's hard to get used to it. It's
Yeah.
not really that bad.
I actually quite like it as a server, yeah. Yeah, I like Server Manager. I like the fact that it's been metroed. I think it's easier. I think it's nicer. I like it. So what seems silly, what we've got a user touch interface on a server. If you'd have asked me, I'd have said I could get used to it on a client OS, but I'd hate it on a server OS. I'm actually exactly the opposite way around. I don't like it on my desktop, but I quite like it on my servers.
I think the key for me, though, was really understanding that whole touch start thing. I don't care what they display there.
Mm.
I start typing and use the search feature to point me out that I want, and that is just so fast, and I'm getting real used to it. It's not bad.
Yeah,
It's just different.
Frankly, a lot of people use Windows 7 that way. You press the Win key, start typing.
yeah,
One big difference.
I do.
When you search in Windows 7, you search through the applications, the files, and the settings of the system.
Mm.
Windows 8, you just search through the applications. Another shortcut for the system settings. That's the only thing I'm...
No, I agree, but
I'll throw a question out. Does anybody seriously believe that users are going to sit in front of a touchscreen and interact and create a touch interface 8 hours a day at their desk? I mean, is this practical?
How strong are your shoulders?
How strong are you?
hey, we got one right there.
This is a touch ultrabook, and absolutely, I use touch on it all day long.
So you-
Absolutely love it.
Okay, so I mean, your use case, you're going from keyboard to the screen. I
You
mean,
can switch all the time, whatever is most convenient for what I'm doing.
so that's a laptop form factor. Are we going to do that with our desktops? We sit a little further away. We got a 24-inch or 27-inch screen.
Well, I mean, I think it depends on your form factor, right? You've got it available to you. You can use it in the right situation.
And I think that's where Windows 8 fits in because in the enterprise we will have more kind of platforms that we'll be managing. So I agree with you when you say that going from doing a full-scale deployment, we're looking at Windows 8 quite heavily, but we're not looking to get all our users off Windows 7 and stick them on Windows 8. Absolutely not. But we really do see use cases within the enterprise, depending on the form factor, where this could really be a benefit.
Cool.
So it's more an accompaniment.
Yeah, yeah. But a sort of a feature set that you might apply to a certain issue or a certain need in your organization rather than going, right, we need to get everybody on Windows 8.
And this is where, I mean, now seeing what the hardware vendors are doing is really interesting because they're, the types of form factors they're coming up with, this type of thing, and whenever the ultrabooks are becoming more mainstream with the touch.
So there was a little point about ultrabooks actually. So Gartner say that 75% of all new laptops are going to be ultrabooks, i.e. they've got an SSD in. So users are getting used to SSD performance on their desktops. And their developers are going to start developing stuff that has access, assumes access to 3,000 local IOPS.